that you'd still be playing them and that they would have meaning to you in some way. It just blows me away. And this is the first time I've ever had to talk about it. So when I say I'm honored to be here today, I really mean it. I'm sorry, it's a little hot up here. There's a few lights, I'm not used to it. So, how did I end up coming to Sierra in the first place? Is my fly open? You know, there's a lot of people who told me I was taking my life in my hands with this little gag. Pardon? I actually, of course, rooted for Argentina, so don't take this seriously. So, anyway, working at Sierra was my dream come true. But I didn't start off as a gamer in any way. I was a comedian. I grew up in a family on the outskirts of show business. My father is a playwright, a TV writer. He's done some movies with directors like Robert Altman and Frank Schaffner, who directed Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes. So every once in a while I got to rub elbows with actors and performers of various sorts, and I wanted nothing more than to be an actor or a performer in some way. And I was a little kid. I got picked on a lot. And so I developed a sense of humor as a defense mechanism. You know, someone would pick on me and I would just make fun of them because I couldn't hit. So I just wanted to be an actor. So after college, and I went to college as a theater major, after college I became a comedian. I moved to Chicago. I wanted to get into Second City, which has been a little theatrical incubator for all sorts of comics and actors, and I developed a comedy routine. I want to back up a little bit. This is Half Dome. Half Dome appears in every Sierra Online logo that's ever existed. And I just want to echo the words of Roberta Williams, who said, an adventure game tells a story, is a game that tells a story and looks and sounds beautiful. So, here's her first game. I'm not here to make fun of Roberta or anything like that. I understand what she meant. She meant something closer to this. So, Ken and Roberta, when they were very young and were just starting online systems in their garage. Anyway, let me go through this a little bit. When you think of Sierra, you probably think of Ken and Roberta. You probably think of this gentleman, Al Lowe, not realizing I was going to take a picture of him. You probably think of Scott and Mark, the two guys from Andromeda. They're in their heyday. And I don't know what adventure games would look like without them. Probably not like this. So, anyway, I was an actor, and I had some experience with commercials. In fact, let's see if this will run. Are we getting video? Do we get video on this? No? All right. This is a Dungeons and Dragons commercial from the 1980s. I was in the first Dungeons and Dragons commercial. I was the dungeon master. But my comedy routine looked more like this. That is me, with my legs behind my neck, because I would do anything for a joke. after about, well, close to 10 years of doing this act with my partner, she said, I'm quitting. And I said, why? We just got our first audition with Star Search. We're doing great. We have headlined at almost every comedy club in the country. Why are you quitting now? Well, it turned out that she was pregnant. And if she was married, you know, she had, not to me, she had a husband. That wasn't me. And she said, I can't go to the clubs anymore, because this was in the late 80s, and back then, at least in the United States, there was no regulation as far as smoking. And she was not willing to spend her nights in smoky clubs anymore once she got about 3 or 4 months pregnant. So she quit. And suddenly I was without an act, and I did a little acting, but mostly I threw myself into gaming. I went on to CompuServe. Does anyone remember CompuServe? Anyone actually? Oh, yeah. 2 people. Oh, no, all right. We got like a dozen people here who remember CompuServe. It looked something like this. And I became a sysop. I don't know if you know what a sysop is. It's short for system operator, and it's basically a moderator. And I was a moderator in the games forum. And so I deeply involved in talking about games, playing games, and then I started writing about games. I started writing walkthroughs for various games, including Leisure Suit Larry. In fact, if you go online and you search well enough, you will find an old ASCII text walkthrough of Leisure Suit Larry 1 that I wrote. And to me, that was great. And the more I wrote for the Electronic Gamer, which was CompuServe's online gaming magazine, the more they would send me free games. So I got my fix without having to pay for it. I got to play all the games I want, write reviews of them. That was the only payment, really. And I really got off on it. Excuse me. So then I expanded. I started writing for games magazines. There was this old magazine, Video Games and Computer Entertainment, that I wrote for a long time, doing reviews, and a few other magazines too. This was one of the few magazines that appealed to adults. Most of them were pretty splashy and trashy and dumbed down. This is the one magazine that really didn't dumb down its content. So after I had been on CompuServe for a while, I found out that one of the better members who spoke up a lot, actually worked at Sierra Online. His name was Garuka Singh Khalsa. And in fact, if you look at almost any of the games that came out between, maybe 1988 and 1994, you will see Garuka listed as producer, unless you see me. Garuka said to me, yes, we'd be happy to try you out as a beta tester. So I started beta testing, and I beta tested for Sierra Online and for a company called Infocom, which was text adventures, and a company called Surtech, which did a few text adventures, but mostly a series called Wizardry. It was a computer RPG. You remember Wizardry? At the time, that was one of the most popular series. But in fact, there were 8 Wizardries that were so popular. You're still playing? Yeah, well, the 4th one is really hard. The one where, yeah. So he said, yeah, you can beta test for me. So I started getting Sierra games. What could be better for a game fan than getting Sierra games for free before anyone else had a chance to play them, and to maybe even have some kind of influence on the development? They have the same thing now, only they make you pay for it. But back then, that was my way. No disrespect, meant to Kickstarter. Although frankly, having done it once, I never want to do it again. So, beta tested for Sierra, quite a few games, and it was a wonderful experience. First of all, for all the reasons I mentioned, what an advantage, but also because I found the whole process fascinating. One day I was beta testing on a game called Codename Iceman. Codename Iceman, I see a few heads nodding yes. Codename Iceman was by Jim Walls, who also designed the Police Quest series. Codename Iceman was a spy game. You had to pilot a submarine, and Sierra's programming language, SCI, was not up to doing submarine simulation. It was a mess. It came out a mess, and I was one of the beta testers. But one day I found a crash bug in it, and they couldn't duplicate it. I reported it, and they couldn't duplicate it. So I got a call from Mark Hood, who was one of the lead programmers there, and had been there since almost the very start. And he said, "We can't duplicate this at home." And I said, "Well, I could send you a save game." He said, "No, that's not going to work." He said, "What we're going to have to do is play the game together over the phone from the beginning." I was happy to do it. I was thrilled. Someone from Sierra called me on the phone. I mean, wow. And I could help. I could be of assistance. And I was really throwing myself into the beta testing. I loved beta testing, and I treated it like it was a full-time job. And what I didn't do is I didn't give them reams of information, thinking that that was going to be helpful, because it wouldn't have been. They got their own jobs. They don't want to read reams of information. They want the information that they need, and only that, and they need it in the format that they want it. So I found out, what format do you want it? How detailed do you want me to get? I asked all these questions, and I really put as much effort as I would into any full-time job into beta testing for them, much to the consternation of the people for whom I was working in my full-time job. But I stayed on the phone with Mark Hood that day for about 5.5 hours, getting to the point in the game where I would have the crash bug. And I got to that point in the game, and I said, boom, that's where it crashed. And he said, and I felt so good. I had helped him. So, beta testing was a wonderful experience, and eventually Garuka called me and said, "Look, I am producing every game at Sierra Online. We are ramping up production like you wouldn't believe. We are thinking about purchasing this company," which I found out after I went to Sierra was Dynamics. "We are producing all these games, and I am the only producer here. Do you want to be considered as a junior producer?" And I thought, there's no way in hell I want to do that job. What a thankless job to be a game producer. I don't know if any of you are producers out here, but it is the most thankless job in this industry. Balancing budgets and egos and expectations and being a diplomat and being a manager. I didn't want any part of it. And I didn't say that to him because, you know, my brain was still functioning at that time of my life. I said, sure. So he flew me out there for an interview. And I can't tell you how absolutely amazed I was when I got there. For instance, I pull up outside the building and I'm hyperventilating. I'm actually at Sierra Online. Holy cow. And the front door opens and this tall guy comes out and he looks vaguely familiar. And he comes up to me, he says, "Hi, you're Josh. I'm Ken." And I'm like, "I'm not worthy. I can't touch your hand." Really? Can I? Everyone was so nice, and I met a whole lot of people, And when I saw what was there in development, when I saw for the first time screenshots from King's Quest V and Space Quest IV, I was like, oh my God, I gotta quit my job and get out here. Now, I didn't want to be a producer. I wanted to be a designer. Because I had been playing Sierra games for years, and I had played Leisure Suit Larry 1. And it was a comedy. And I sat and looked at it, and I've never said this to Al Lowe, but I looked at it and I said, I can do better than this. I can make a funnier game than this one. Because what those early games didn't have, for instance, was timing. Comedy requires timing. And there were a lot of jokes in Leisure Suit Larry, and it was a very funny game, but I thought, no, you can go a step farther. You can take the comedy farther with it. So I wanted to be a designer, but it was a foot in the door. So I took the foot in the door. And within 9 months, I was head of the product design department. And that was, it says less about me than it says about how tumultuous the place was and the speed with which the company was changing. When they hired me as a junior producer, I started on King's Quest I SCI, a project that had been languishing for over a year and had not come out yet. We were remaking King's Quest I in the new engine, SCI. The previous engine had been AGI, and SCI had much better resolution. So I got to meet Roberta and work on that. That was my first assignment. Produce King's Quest I SCI and get it out the door already. So I did, but I said to Roberta, by the way, the text for this game, it's kind of sparse. Back in those days, it had to be a 2-word command in King's Quest I AGI, a 2-word command, and the responses were similarly brief. And I said, you know, if we kind of plumped up the text a little bit and maybe illuminated the game with the text, and she said, do whatever you like. And I was like, great! And I rewrote the text and dialogue for the whole game. I was happy to do it. I wanted to show them that I could write. And she only made 2 changes in all the text that I wrote. I mean, she wanted final say, which of course was the logical thing to do. But she only made 2 changes, and one of them was at the very end. King Edward, I think his name is, dies, and Sir Graham becomes King Graham, and one of the treasures he's found was a mirror, a magic mirror. And we knew now, because we had already done King's Quest II and King's Quest III and King's Quest IV, that mirror was going to end up on the wall of the throne room. So I wrote this line where, with King Edward's dying breath, he said, I think the mirror would look nicest over there. And Roberta said, I don't think his dying words are going to be interior design tips. And I said, I mean, I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. She was touching almost nothing that I wrote. And I said, I just want to point out that he doesn't know those are his dying words. He wasn't planning on dying after saying them. But, you know, it's your decision. And she said, yeah, I think we'll leave it out. And I said, okay. So, but all in all, it was a great experience. And at the same time, I went to all the other designers. And I said, if you happen to need anything written in terms of dialogue, click messages, I forget what we called them back then, I think it was click events, I would be happy to try to write some text for you. And if you don't like it, you don't have to use it, but if you like it, you can put it in the game. And almost everyone declined, except Roberta and Scott and Mark, for their work on Space Quest IV, because they wanted a lot of text. So in my spare time, while I was producing King's Quest I SCI and Zelyard and a whole lot of other games, I also did all this writing. And for Space Quest 4, I wrote the software bin, where there are parodies of other games that were hot at the time. For instance, Loom, Brian Moriarty's game Loom, was pretty hot at the time, so we created one called Boom that was like no interface, no plot, no text, no dialogue, no nothing. It's the easiest adventure game to play ever. So I wrote for them, and I wrote a little bit for Christy Marks, just a very little bit, because Christy Marks, who did the Conquests of Camelot, and the Conquests series, she had enough drive and pride in her own work. She really didn't want to farm it out. Corey and Laurie Cole did not want to farm out their work. But some of the other designers were perfectly open to seeing what I could come up with and see if it would enhance their games. And so that was my foot in the door. But the other foot in the door came when I was able to synthesize the comedy act with Sierra. And that happened about 8 months after I got there. It was time for the Christmas party, the annual Christmas party. And they said, well, we usually have entertainment at the Christmas party. What are we going to have this year? And I said, well, if you want, you can fly my comedy partner out, and we can do our little act for you. And they said, oh, that would be nice. Let's do that. So that's what they did. They brought my comedy partner out. We hadn't done a show at that point in about 4 years. And we rehearsed for a couple of days before the Christmas party, and then we did the Christmas party. And they weren't expecting a highly polished 1 hour act that had played at the comedy clubs in LA and New York. They probably thought we were going to do some little jokey thing. I don't know what they were expecting. But we gave them a good show. And Ken came backstage afterwards and he said, you know what? You shouldn't be producing. You're an entertaining kind of guy. You can write these games. And I said, okay. I'm okay with that. And a few weeks later, I started on Freddie Farkas, and so from there on, it was all a career move that I hadn't expected. So that's how I got started at Sierra, and that's how I got started designing at Sierra. It's not your usual career path, but maybe it'll be helpful to someone somewhere along the way. I want to talk about some of the other people at Sierra who were important that you may not know about. I mean, you know about the big name designers, you know about Corey and Laurie, Scott and Mark, Jane Jensen, all of these people, but there were other people who were there at least as long and had at least as much influence on the games as the people whose names you already know. So I've mentioned Garuka, and the thing with Garuka is that, well, his office was like a pool of calm. I mean, people would go to his office to say, Garuka, I'm so frustrated with this, I'm so frustrated with that, and he would say, here, let me give you a massage. Let's find your center. But he also had a wonderful game sensibility, and a lot of the designers leaned on him very heavily for help when it came to designing games. So, and he did not have an easy time there. Oakhurst, California, where Sierra was located at the time, is a very small town. Just not even, I think, when I was there anyway, not even 1,000 people. It was 50 miles from the nearest city of any size at all, in a little valley about 20 miles south of the southern gate of Yosemite National Park, which I'll talk about in a bit. And Garuka was a Sikh. He came into town wearing a turban. The people in Oakhurst did not know what to make of this. He got stopped by the police on more than one occasion. What are you doing here, sir? This very small town thought going on at Sierra all the time, because a lot of the people who work there were not there to work on games. They were there because Sierra happened to be the largest employer in So they would do anything that was asked of them because there was really only one other employer of any size in town, and they weren't excited about games. They weren't there to make history. They weren't there to entertain. They were just there because it was a job. So, for instance, some of them would not work on an Al Lowe game. They would not touch a Leisure Suit Larry game. Why? Because it's filthy. Of course, if you played Leisure Suit Larry, you know there's nothing filthy about it. It's just it was almost like a marketing gimmick. You know, oh, there's a lot of salacious material in this game. You're going to be shocked. Hide the children. There really wasn't much in there, but we had people who would refuse to work. There was an artist I wanted to work on Freddie Fargus. She said, no. I said, why not? She said, it's an Al Lowe game. It's going to be dirty. I said, no. I worked on the design with him. It's not dirty. There's no dirt in it. She said, no. There were other people who wouldn't work on Quest for Glory games, previously Heroes Quest. They wouldn't work on them. Why? Because black magic. There was black magic. It was anti-Christian. They weren't going to go anywhere near it. So it became a regular thing. When a new game was starting up, you had to make lists of who would refuse to work on the game and who wouldn't refuse to work on the game. We had the same thing many years later when Jim Walls left Sierra, and the Police Quest series was turned over to, the person sort of in charge of it was Daryl Gates. Daryl Gates, Police Quest 4, and I think 5 too, perhaps, or SWAT 1. Daryl Gates was associated with them. Daryl Gates was chief of police in Los Angeles County at the time that the Rodney King beatings went on. It was a very big thing. And there were a lot of people, and the Rodney King thing was a race issue, and it was a police versus public issue. It was a huge divisive issue throughout the country. And there were a lot of people who would not work on a game with Daryl Gates on it. And there were people who were proud to work on a game with Daryl Gates, name on the box, but for everyone else, they started calling it Rodney King's Quest. Very divisive. So anyway, Garuka did not have an easy time of it in Oakhurst. Another person who was at Sierra for many, many years was the creative director. His name is Bill Davis. Now, this picture and the way that it's formatted here, unfortunately, make it look like he's dead. He's not dead. He's still alive and actually still working in the industry. But he brought something to Sierra that Sierra never had. I'll tell you a bit about where he came from. There was a show in the late 60s and the early 70s, a TV show called Laugh-In. Has anyone ever heard of it? No one's heard of Laugh-In. Laugh-In was, at the time, very raucous, and people in America had never seen anything like it before. They told political jokes, which you couldn't do on American TV. In fact, Richard Nixon, the president, made a brief appearance on this show. They told sexy jokes. That was not done on American television. American television still had, if you saw people's bedroom, like a couple's bedroom, the husband and wife still had separate beds. That didn't change until mid-70s. So Rowan and Morton's Laugh-In was before its time, really. If you go back and you see it now, because they brought some episodes out on DVD, it's really corny and awful. But at the time, you felt deliciously dirty just watching it. And they had a go-go dancer on Laugh-In. They hired a go-go dancer. Her name was Goldie Hawn. Does anyone know who Goldie Hawn is? Good. American film star, almost always plays ditzy blondes. She was hired on Laugh-In to dance with all kinds of little graffiti painted all over her. And there is Goldie, and there is some of the graffiti from Laugh-In. She also, by the way, is still alive. And who do you think painted the graffiti on Goldie Hawn when he was a young man? Well, it was Bill Davis. He went on to much bigger and better things. He won an Emmy Award years later for his work on The Tonight Show, which was an institution on American television for a long, long time. He designed these screens that said "More to Come," and they would play before the commercials. And he won an Emmy Award for the quality of those screens, some of which he sold on eBay. So I should have grabbed one while I could. So he painted Goldie Hawn on Laugh-In, as well as Andy Hoyos. Andy Hoyos also painted Goldie Hawn on Laugh-In and also came to work for Sierra. I don't think it was a coincidence. He was one of the art directors, one of the main art directors at Sierra. In fact, when you see the beautiful artwork in King's Quest V, that was Andy Hoyos' work. Andy Hoyos worked at Sierra for years and years, and just did astonishing work. And he was a very fun guy too. I shared an office with him for a while, and he's alive. So Bill Davis did something at Sierra that had never been done before. He tried to give it a cohesive look. He wanted Sierra games to have their own definitive look. So he came up with this kind of jaunty, weird angled look that started to get filtered into lots of Sierra games. This is Jones in the Fast Lane, which was it wasn't an adventure, it was a board game. And that's Jones, that guy. That gentleman is Bill Skirvin. He was one of the artists. We used ourselves constantly in these games because it was cheaper than hiring actors, and there were none in Oakhurst. There was another game we put out called Oil's Well, and you can see, again, this is very classic Bill Davis art style. You can see it in Larry 5. This was Larry 5, and Larry has a very different look here than he had in any of the previous Leisure Suit Larry games. The remake of Larry 1, which was actually the second remake of Soft Porn Adventure. And again, you can see the weird, the jaunty angles and it's a very definitive look. We had a designer, Lorelei Shannon, who did a marvelous children's adventure called Pepper's Adventures in Time. This is a screen from Pepper's Adventures in Time. One of the things that Pepper's Adventures in Time did really well was she wrote on 2 levels. She wrote on a level for children, and she wrote on a level for adults, which The Simpsons sometimes does. Rocky and Bullwinkle used to do it all the time. It's not easy to do, but she was able to do it in this game. And you can see Bill Davis's influence there.